The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty compound in eastern Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez limped slowly across the open courtyard, her left leg wrapped in field bandages that had seen better days. The shrapnel wound from yesterday's IED blast still throbbed with each step, but she refused to show weakness in front of the other soldiers. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison watched her from the shade of a concrete bunker where his SEAL team had gathered for their afternoon briefing. He nudged his teammate, Petty Officer First Class Danny Chen, and smirked. "Look at that," Morrison said loudly enough for several nearby soldiers to hear. "Guess they're letting anyone into combat roles these days. Maybe she should stick to the medical tent where it's safe." The other SEALs chuckled, though some looked uncomfortable. Chief Petty Officer Mike Torres, the team's most experienced member, frowned but said nothing. He had served long enough to know that Rodriguez had earned her place here, but Morrison was his commanding officer. Rodriguez heard every word. Her jaw clenched, but she kept walking without turning around. She had heard worse during her 8 years of service, rising through the ranks despite constant doubts about women in combat roles. The Purple Heart Medal hidden beneath her uniform told a different story about her courage, earned during a firefight where she had dragged 2 wounded soldiers to safety while under heavy enemy fire. Morrison's voice carried across the courtyard again. "I heard she got that limp running away from contact yesterday. Probably froze up when the shooting started. These desk jockeys shouldn't be out here with real soldiers." This time, Rodriguez stopped walking. She turned slowly, her dark eyes meeting Morrison's across the dusty space. For a moment, the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Several soldiers had gathered to watch, sensing the tension building between the wounded Army sergeant and the cocky SEAL officer. Rodriguez's voice was steady and calm when she finally spoke. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, is it?" she asked, taking a few steps closer. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, 82nd Airborne Division." Morrison stood up straighter, his chest puffed out with misplaced confidence. "That's right, Sergeant. And I'm wondering why wounded personnel are wandering around operational areas instead of getting proper medical attention. Because some of us don't have the luxury of sitting in the shade talking about other people's service records," Rodriguez replied evenly. "Some of us have actual work to do." The gathered soldiers began to murmur among themselves. Everyone knew Morrison's team had arrived at the forward operating base just 3 days ago, while Rodriguez had been deployed for 6 months. She had been involved in more combat operations than most of Morrison's team combined. Morrison's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he considered beneath his rank and status. "Listen here, Sergeant," he began, his voice rising. "I've been a SEAL for 7 years. I've completed missions you couldn't even imagine. Don't lecture me about service or dedication." Rodriguez nodded slowly, as if considering his words carefully. 7 years, she repeated. "That's impressive, sir. And how many of those years were spent in active combat zones?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Morrison's teammates exchanged glances, knowing the answer would not help their commander's position. Most of Morrison's career had been spent in training exercises and support roles. This deployment was actually his first extended combat assignment. "That's classified information," Morrison replied, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Of course it is," Rodriguez said with a slight smile. "Well, sir, since you're concerned about my medical condition, you'll be happy to know that I'm cleared for duty. In fact, I'm leading a patrol into Sector 7 this evening. Intel suggests there's been increased enemy activity near the village of Kala-i-Nal." Morrison scoffed. "A patrol? Into Sector 7? That's SEAL territory, Sergeant. We handle the dangerous missions around here. Maybe you should focus on convoy security or perimeter duty." Rodriguez's smile widened, and several of the watching soldiers began to grin as well. They knew something Morrison didn't. Actually, sir, Major Campbell specifically requested that I lead this mission. Apparently, my experience with the local population and knowledge of the terrain makes me the best choice. Your experience? Morrison laughed harshly. What experience could you possibly have that my team doesn't? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying Morrison's face. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but carried clearly across the courtyard. Well, sir, for starters, I speak Pashto and Dari fluently. I've spent the last 6 months building relationships with village elders throughout this region. I've successfully completed 43 combat patrols without losing a single soldier under my command. She paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. I've also defused 17 improvised explosive devices, coordinated 8 successful medical evacuations under enemy fire, and helped establish 3 new aid distribution points that have improved relations with local civilians. The courtyard had gone completely quiet. Even Morrison's own teammates were staring at Rodriguez with new respect. Chief Torres stepped forward slightly, his weathered face showing the beginning of a smile. Rodriguez wasn't finished. But most importantly, Lieutenant Commander, I know every inch of Sector 7 because I was part of the original reconnaissance team that mapped it when we first arrived. The village of Kala-e-Nao isn't just a name on a map to me. I know the shopkeeper who lost his son to an insurgent attack. I know the school teacher who's been hiding girls' textbooks from the Taliban. I know which houses have secret rooms where families hide when the fighting gets bad. Morrison's face had gone pale. He had clearly expected an easy target when he decided to mock the limping female sergeant. Instead, he had picked a fight with someone whose credentials far exceeded his own. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, since you seem concerned about my combat effectiveness, you might be interested to know that yesterday's IED blast occurred when I was returning from a successful mission to evacuate a wounded Afghan National Army officer. The shrapnel in my leg came from diving on top of Private Martinez to shield him from the secondary explosion. Martinez is alive today because I was there, and he was there because I specifically requested him for my team. The silence stretched on for several seconds before Chief Torres cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said formally, addressing Rodriguez, if you're looking for additional personnel for tonight's patrol, my team and I would be honored to assist. Morrison spun around to stare at his senior enlisted man in shock. Chief, what are you doing? Torres met his commanding officer's eyes steadily. Sir, I'm volunteering for a combat mission led by an experienced patrol leader. Isn't that why we're here? Rodriguez nodded to Torres with genuine appreciation. Thank you, Chief. I'll discuss it with Major Campbell. We can always use experienced operators who understand the importance of teamwork. Morrison felt his authority slipping away. In trying to embarrass Rodriguez, he had instead revealed his own inexperience and poor judgment. Worse, his own team was now openly showing more respect for the wounded Army sergeant than for him. Now wait just a minute, Morrison protested. I'm the ranking officer here. If my team is going on patrol, I'll be leading it. Rodriguez tilted her head slightly, studying him with curious eyes. Of course, sir. That's absolutely your prerogative. I'm sure Major Campbell would be happy to discuss the mission parameters with you. The patrol briefing is at 1900 hours if you'd like to attend. Morrison realized too late that he had backed himself into a corner. He had publicly questioned Rodriguez's competence and claimed that dangerous missions were SEAL territory. Now he either had to back down and look weak or commit to a patrol led by someone he had just finished insulting. Fine, he said stiffly. We'll see how a real team handles Sector 7. Rodriguez nodded politely. I look forward to working with you, sir. She turned to address the gathered soldiers. Anybody else interested in tonight's mission should report to the briefing room at 1900. We'll be moving out at 2100 hours. As she walked away, her limp somehow less noticeable than before, the courtyard slowly began to empty. Morrison's teammates gathered their gear in uncomfortable silence, avoiding their commanding officer's eyes. Chief Torres paused before following the others. "Sir," he said quietly, "you might want to know that Sergeant Rodriguez was awarded the Purple Heart for yesterday's action. She's also been recommended for the Bronze Star with V device." Morrison felt his stomach drop. The Bronze Star with V device was awarded for heroic or meritorious achievement in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. It was a decoration that Morrison had never earned, despite his 7 years of service. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Morrison asked weakly. Torres shrugged. "Sir, you never asked about her record. You just made assumptions." As his chief walked away, Morrison stood alone in the courtyard. Realizing that his attempt to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly, he had not only embarrassed himself in front of his own team, but had also committed to a dangerous patrol led by someone he had just insulted. The afternoon heat suddenly felt oppressive, and Morrison began to understand that tonight's patrol would be unlike anything he had experienced before. In trying to prove his superiority over a wounded female soldier, he had instead revealed his own shortcomings to everyone on the base. Rodriguez, meanwhile, made her way to the medical tent to have her bandages changed. The medic, Corporal Sarah Kim, greeted her with a concerned frown. "Maria, how's the leg feeling?" Kim asked as she began unwrapping the old bandages. "It's manageable," Rodriguez replied, "but I need you to wrap it extra tight tonight." "We're going on patrol." Kim paused in her work. "Maria, you just got back yesterday. Don't you think you should rest for a few more days?" Rodriguez shook her head. "Can't do it, Sarah. Major Campbell specifically requested me for this mission. Besides, there's a new SEAL team that thinks they know better than everyone else. Someone needs to keep them from getting themselves killed." Kim resumed cleaning the wound, her touch gentle but efficient. "I heard about the incident in the courtyard. Word travels fast around here." "Morrison's not a bad soldier," Rodriguez said thoughtfully. "He's just inexperienced and trying too hard to prove himself. That combination can get people killed in Sector 7. So why are you helping him? After the way he talked to you?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, watching Kim work on her injured leg. "Because that's what we do, Sarah. We look out for each other even when they don't deserve it, especially when they don't deserve it." Kim finished applying fresh bandages and began wrapping them securely. "Well, just promise me you'll be careful. I don't want to see you back here with more holes in you." "I promise," Rodriguez said, though they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. As she left the medical tent, Rodriguez's mind was already focused on the evening's patrol. Sector 7 was dangerous territory, filled with narrow alleys and hidden positions perfect for ambushes. She would need to keep Morrison and his team alive while completing their assigned objectives, all while dealing with her own injury. The wounded female soldier who had been mocked and dismissed just hours earlier was now responsible for the lives of the very people who had questioned her competence. It was a responsibility she didn't take lightly, regardless of their earlier behavior. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the Afghan sky in shades of orange and red. Soon, the real test would begin. The briefing room was crowded at 1900 hours. Major Campbell stood at the front with a detailed map of Sector 7 projected on the wall behind him. Rodriguez sat in the front row, her gear already prepared, and her injured leg stretched out carefully beneath the chair. Morrison entered with his 4-man SEAL team, their pristine equipment a stark contrast to the worn, battle-tested gear of the other soldiers present. Chief Torres nodded respectfully to Rodriguez as they took seats near the back. "Listen up, everyone," Major Campbell began. "Intelligence suggests that a high-value target has been moving weapons through the village of Kala-i-Nau. We've received reports of increased insurgent activity, and local sources indicate there may be a cache of improvised explosive devices hidden somewhere in the village. He pointed to various locations on the map as he continued. Sergeant Rodriguez will be leading this patrol due to her extensive knowledge of the area and established relationships with the local population. The mission is to conduct a presence patrol, gather intelligence, and locate any potential weapons caches. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had expected to be announced as the patrol leader, despite the earlier conversation in the courtyard. "Sir," Morrison interrupted, raising his hand. "With respect, wouldn't it be more appropriate for the SEAL team to take point on this mission? We specialize in direct action and reconnaissance." Major Campbell's expression remained neutral, but Rodriguez could see the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated annoyance. "Lieutenant Commander, Sergeant Rodriguez has successfully completed 43 patrols in this exact area without losing a single soldier. Her tactical knowledge and cultural understanding make her the obvious choice for this mission." "But sir," Morrison pressed, "my team has advanced training in urban warfare and close-quarters combat. Surely that would be more valuable than," he gestured vaguely, "cultural understanding." The room fell silent. Several experienced soldiers exchanged meaningful glances, recognizing Morrison's words as a thinly veiled insult to Rodriguez's capabilities. Rodriguez remained calm, but her voice carried a subtle edge when she spoke. "Lieutenant Commander, with all due respect, advanced training means nothing if you walk into an ambush because you don't understand local customs or can't communicate with potential witnesses." She stood slowly, favoring her injured leg, and moved to stand beside the map. "For example, in Kala Inao, approaching the central mosque from the east side during evening prayers would be seen as deeply disrespectful and would immediately turn the entire village against us. However, approaching from the west and waiting for prayers to conclude shows proper respect and makes the villagers more likely to cooperate." She pointed to a specific location on the map. "There's also a tea house here where the village elders gather every evening. The owner, Abdul Rahman, lost his brother to insurgent violence last year. If approached correctly, he's been a valuable source of information. But if we show up in full combat gear acting aggressively, he'll clam up and we'll learn nothing." Morrison's face flushed, but he had no response to her detailed knowledge. Major Campbell nodded approvingly. "Exactly why Sergeant Rodriguez is leading this patrol. Lieutenant Commander, your team will provide security and support her as needed. This is her area of expertise." The briefing continued with details about routes, communication protocols, and contingency plans. Rodriguez outlined her strategy for approaching the village, explaining how they would split into smaller groups to cover more ground while maintaining mutual support. "The key," she explained, "is to look confident but not threatening. We want the villagers to see us as protectors, not occupiers. That means no pointing weapons at civilians, no kicking down doors, and absolutely no disrespecting local customs." Morrison's teammate, Petty Officer Chen, raised his hand. "Sergeant, what if we encounter armed resistance? What's the rules of engagement?" Rodriguez appreciated the professional tone of the question. "Same as always, Petty Officer. We don't fire unless fired upon or unless there's an immediate threat to civilian life. But remember, in a village environment, every shot we fire creates 10 new enemies. Our goal is intelligence gathering, not combat." Chief Torres spoke up from the back. "Ma'am, what about the weapons cache? If we locate it, do we secure it immediately or call for additional support?" "Good question, Chief. If we find a small cache, we'll document it and post security while calling for explosive ordnance disposal. If it's larger than we can handle safely, we'll withdraw and call for additional support. Nobody tries to be a hero tonight." The briefing concluded with final equipment checks and synchronization of watches. As the soldiers filed out to prepare their gear, Morrison lingered behind, approaching Rodriguez with obvious reluctance. "Sergeant," he began, his voice less confrontational than earlier, "I want you to know that my team will follow your lead tonight. We may have had our differences, but I'm not going to let personal feelings compromise the mission. Rodriguez studied his face, searching for sincerity. I appreciate that, sir. For what it's worth, I've heard good things about your team's technical skills. We're going to need everyone at their best tonight. Morrison nodded stiffly and left to join his men. Rodriguez gathered her gear, double-checking her equipment one final time. Her rifle was clean and properly zeroed, her radio was functioning correctly, and her medical kit was fully stocked. At 2100 hours, the patrol assembled at the base's main gate. Rodriguez conducted a final inspection of each soldier, checking their gear and reviewing hand signals and communication procedures. The night was moonless and dark, providing excellent concealment as they moved through the rough terrain toward Cala Inao. Rodriguez set a steady pace despite her injured leg, using terrain features to mask their movement from potential observers. After an hour of careful movement, they reached the outskirts of the village. Rodriguez called a halt and gathered the team leaders around her position. "Remember," she whispered, "we go in quiet and respectful. Chief Torres, take your men and establish security on the north side of the village. Morrison, you and Chen watch our backs from here. Petty Officer Williams and Martinez, you're with me for the initial contact with the village elders." Morrison started to protest being left in a security position, but Torres caught his eye and shook his head slightly. This was not the time or place for ego battles. Rodriguez led her small team into the village, moving slowly down the narrow dirt streets. The buildings were modest stone and mud brick structures, many showing damage from years of conflict. A few dogs barked in the distance, but no lights appeared in windows. They approached the tea house where Abdul Rahman conducted his evening business. A warm glow emanated from the windows, and the sound of quiet conversation could be heard from inside. Rodriguez paused outside the door and removed her helmet, a gesture of respect that would be noticed and appreciated. She knocked softly and called out in fluent Pashto, identifying herself to the people inside. The conversation stopped immediately. After a moment, the door opened slightly, revealing an elderly man with a weathered face and careful eyes. "Abdul Rahman," Rodriguez said formally in Pashto, "I am Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. We have met before. I hope you and your family are well." The old man's expression softened slightly as he recognized her. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he replied in accented but clear English. "You are welcome here. Please come inside." Rodriguez gestured for her teammates to wait outside as she entered the tea house. The interior was small but warm, with several village elders seated on cushions around a low table. All eyes turned toward the American soldier as she approached. Rodriguez removed her gloves and accepted the glass of tea that Abdul Rahman offered, another gesture of respect that did not go unnoticed. She spent several minutes engaging in polite conversation, asking about families and crops and local concerns. Finally, when the proper courtesies had been observed, she broached the subject of their visit. "Abdul Rahman, we have heard that there may be dangerous men in the area, men who would bring harm to your village. Have you seen anything unusual?" The old man exchanged glances with the other elders before responding carefully. "There have been strangers, yes, men who do not show proper respect, men who speak of fighting against the government soldiers." Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, keeping her expression neutral. "Can you tell me where these strangers have been staying? We want to protect your village from any trouble they might bring." Abdul Rahman was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. Rodriguez waited patiently, knowing that rushing him would only make him less likely to cooperate. "There is an old storage building near the abandoned mill," he finally said. "These men have been seen there at night. But, Sergeant, they are dangerous men. They have threatened anyone who speaks against them." Rodriguez nodded understandingly. "I appreciate your courage in telling me this, Abdul Rahman. We will handle these men carefully, and we will make sure they cannot threaten your people anymore." She finished her tea and prepared to leave, but Abdul Rahman caught her arm gently. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "be very careful. These men have explosives, many explosives, and they have been asking questions about American patrol routes." Rodriguez felt her blood run cold, but kept her expression calm. "Thank you for the warning, my friend. Allah protect you and your family." She left the tea house and quickly rejoined her teammates outside. Using hand signals, she indicated that they needed to move immediately to a secure position where she could radio the information to the rest of the patrol. They made their way to a small alley where Rodriguez could speak quietly into her radio without being overheard. "All stations, this is Rodriguez. I have critical intelligence. The target building is the old storage facility near the abandoned mill. Be advised, subjects are heavily armed with explosives and may have intelligence on our patrol routes." Morrison's voice crackled back over the radio. "Rodriguez, this is Morrison. Should we call for backup before proceeding?" Rodriguez considered the options quickly. Calling for backup would take at least an hour, during which time the insurgents might escape with their weapons cache. But proceeding with their current force was risky given the reported heavy armament. "Negative," she replied. "We proceed as planned, but with extreme caution. All teams converge on my position for updated briefing." Within minutes, the entire patrol had gathered in the shadows of a collapsed building. Rodriguez quickly outlined what she had learned from Abdul Rahman, emphasizing the presence of explosives and the potential for an ambush. "This changes our approach," she explained. "We can't risk a direct assault if they have a large cache of explosives. Instead, we'll conduct surveillance first to determine the exact threat level." Morrison stepped forward. "Sergeant, my team is trained for this type of reconnaissance. Let us handle the surveillance while you coordinate with the village contacts." Rodriguez looked at him carefully, seeing genuine professionalism in his expression rather than the earlier arrogance. "All right, Lieutenant Commander. Take Chief Torres and Petty Officer Chen. Observe only, no engagement unless absolutely necessary. Report back in 30 minutes." Morrison nodded and signaled his men. As they prepared to move toward the target building, Rodriguez caught Torres's arm. "Chief," she said quietly, "keep him alive. Whatever else happens tonight, make sure everyone comes home." Torres smiled grimly. "Roger that, Sergeant. We'll be careful." As Morrison's team disappeared into the darkness, Rodriguez settled into a security position with the remaining soldiers. Her injured leg throbbed constantly. But she ignored the pain and focused on maintaining radio contact with all elements of the patrol. 20 minutes later, Morrison's voice came over the radio, tense and urgent. "Rodriguez, this is Morrison. We've got a problem. The building is definitely occupied and there are at least 6 armed individuals inside. But that's not the worst part." Rodriguez felt her stomach tighten. "Go ahead, Morrison." "They're not just storing weapons here, Sergeant. They're building something big. And from what we can see, they're almost finished with it." The night had just become much more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The wounded female soldier who had been mocked hours earlier now found herself responsible for preventing what could be a catastrophic terrorist attack. The SEAL team that had questioned her competence was now depending on her judgment to keep them alive. Rodriguez keyed her radio again, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Morrison, maintain your position and continue surveillance. All other stations, prepare for immediate tactical reassessment. We may need to shift from reconnaissance to direct action." As she spoke, Rodriguez was already formulating a plan that would require every skill she had learned in 8 years of military service. The wounded leg that had been the subject of mockery earlier would soon be the least of her concerns. The night was far from over, and the real test of leadership was about to begin. Rodriguez's mind raced as she processed Morrison's report. A large, improvised explosive device under construction in a civilian area meant potential mass casualties if it was completed and deployed. The mission had transformed from simple reconnaissance into a race against time. "All stations, this is Rodriguez," she whispered into her radio. "New mission parameters. We have a time-sensitive target requiring immediate neutralization. Morrison, I need a detailed description of what you're observing." Morrison's voice came back immediately, much more focused than it had been during the afternoon's confrontation. "Rodriguez, we're looking at what appears to be a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. Large truck, cargo area packed with explosive materials. There are wires and electronic components visible. 2 individuals are working on what looks like a timing device." Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. A truck bomb in this area could devastate not just the village, but potentially the forward operating base as well. The road from Kala Inal led directly back to their compound. "Morrison, can you determine their timeline? How close are they to completion?" There was a pause before Morrison replied. "Difficult to say from this distance, but based on their activity level, I'd estimate they need maybe 2 hours to finish the device." 2 hours. Rodriguez quickly calculated their options. Calling for air support would take at least 90 minutes, and bombing a building in the middle of a civilian village would cause unacceptable collateral damage. A direct assault was risky given the amount of explosives involved, but it might be their only option. "Copy that," Rodriguez responded. "Maintain surveillance and report any changes immediately." She turned to the soldiers around her, seeing the tension in their faces as they absorbed the gravity of the situation. Private Martinez, who had been wounded in the previous day's IED attack, looked particularly concerned. "All right, listen up," Rodriguez said quietly. "We've got a complex situation here. There's a truck bomb being assembled that could kill hundreds of people, including everyone at our base. We can't wait for backup, and we can't risk an airstrike in this location." She paused, looking each soldier in the eye. "I'm not going to lie to you. This is dangerous. Anyone who wants to pull back and call for support, speak up now. No judgment, no shame." The soldiers looked at each other, but no one spoke up. Private Martinez, despite his recent injuries, actually stepped closer to Rodriguez. "What's the plan, Sergeant?" he asked simply. Rodriguez felt a surge of pride in her soldiers, but also the heavy weight of responsibility. These men were trusting her judgment with their lives. "We're going to use the element of surprise and our knowledge of the village layout," she explained. "But first, I need to make contact with Abdul Rahman again. If we're going to operate in his village, we need his help to minimize civilian casualties." She detailed her plan quickly. While Morrison's team maintained surveillance, she would return to the tea house to coordinate with the village elders. They would need to quietly evacuate any civilians near the target building without alerting the insurgents. "Rodriguez," Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "One of the subjects just left the building heading east toward the village center. He's carrying what looks like a small backpack." Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. "Copy that. All stations, we may have a subject moving through the civilian area. Do not engage unless he poses an immediate threat to civilians." She quickly moved back toward the tea house, her injured leg protesting with each step. The pain was becoming harder to ignore, but she pushed it aside and focused on the mission. Abdul Rahman was still awake when she arrived, almost as if he had been expecting her return. She quickly explained the situation in simple terms, emphasizing the danger to his village if the truck bomb was completed. The old man's face went pale. "Sergeant, there are families living near that building, women and children who cannot protect themselves." "That's why I need your help," Rodriguez replied. "Can you quietly send word to those families to leave their homes for a few hours? Tell them there may be fighting, and they should stay with relatives in the southern part of the village." Abdul Rahman nodded grimly. "It will be done." But, Sergeant, these men have lookouts. If they see unusual activity, they may try to detonate their device early. Rodriguez had considered this possibility. How quickly can you get the families moved without raising suspicion? Give me 20 minutes, the old man replied. I will send my grandson and his friends to spread the word quietly. They often visit those houses anyway. Rodriguez checked her watch. They were cutting it close. But civilian safety had to be the priority. 20 minutes, then we move. She returned to her team and updated them on the plan. Morrison's team would continue surveillance while her soldiers took positions around the target building. Once the civilians were clear, they would move simultaneously from multiple directions to prevent the insurgents from escaping or detonating their device. Rodriguez, this is Morrison, came the radio call. The subject who left earlier just returned. All 6 individuals are now back inside the building. Their work pace has increased significantly. Rodriguez felt time running out. Copy that. Stand by for further orders. 25 minutes later, Abdul Rahman appeared at her position with his teenage grandson. It is done, he reported. All families have moved away. My grandson will guide your soldiers through the alleys to avoid the lookouts. Rodriguez nodded gratefully. Thank you, both of you. Please stay far away from this area until we're finished. She keyed her radio for the final coordination. All stations, this is Rodriguez. Civilians are clear. We move in 5 minutes. Morrison, I need you to identify the exact position of each target inside the building. Morrison's response was professional and detailed. Rodriguez, 4 subjects on the ground floor working on the vehicle device. 2 subjects on the second floor. One appears to be on watch, the other working with communications equipment. Rodriguez quickly finalized her plan. Morrison's team would take the second floor to prevent the insurgents from calling for help or detonating the device remotely. Her team would secure the ground floor and the vehicle bomb. Remember, she emphasized, our priority is preventing detonation of that device. If anyone makes a move toward the explosive materials, they are an immediate threat. The soldiers checked their weapons one final time and moved into position. Rodriguez felt her heart pounding as they approached the target building, but her mind remained clear and focused. At exactly 0200 hours, both teams moved simultaneously. Morrison's SEAL team breached the second floor from an external staircase, while Rodriguez led her soldiers through the main entrance. The assault was swift and professional. The insurgents, focused on their bomb-making activities, were caught completely off guard. Within 90 seconds, all 6 subjects were secured without a single shot being fired. Rodriguez immediately moved to examine the vehicle device while her soldiers secured the building. What she saw made her blood run cold. The truck was packed with hundreds of pounds of explosives, connected to a sophisticated timing device that showed less than 30 minutes remaining on its countdown. Morrison, get your communications specialist down here immediately, she called urgently. We've got an active timer with 28 minutes left. Petty Officer Chen appeared within seconds, his face going pale as he saw the device. Sergeant, this is way beyond my training level. We need explosive ordnance disposal immediately. Rodriguez was already on her radio calling for emergency EOD support, but she knew they couldn't get a team to the location in under an hour. She studied the device carefully, drawing on her limited bomb disposal training. Morrison appeared at her shoulder. Rodriguez, what are our options? She looked at him steadily. We can try to disarm it ourselves, or we can evacuate the entire village and hope the building contains most of the blast. Morrison stared at the complex array of wires and electronic components. What do you think our chances are of disarming it successfully? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, honestly assessing their situation. Maybe 50%, maybe less. I've got basic EOD training, but this is sophisticated work. Morrison nodded slowly. And if we evacuate the village? Some people might not get far enough away in time, and if this thing goes off, the blast could still reach the outer buildings. The two soldiers looked at each other, both understanding the weight of the decision they faced. Morrison spoke first. "Sergeant, this is your area of expertise. What's your recommendation?" Rodriguez felt the responsibility settle on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Every person in the village was depending on her judgment. Her own team was depending on her leadership. "We try to disarm it," she decided, "but we evacuate everyone except essential personnel first." Morrison keyed his radio. "All stations, this is Morrison. Initiate village evacuation immediately. All non-essential personnel fall back to minimum safe distance." Rodriguez was already examining the device more closely, tracing the wire connections and trying to understand the bomb maker's logic. Her injured leg throbbed constantly as she crouched beside the truck. But she blocked out the pain and focused entirely on the task at hand. With 15 minutes left on the timer, she had identified what she believed to be the main power source. Morrison crouched beside her, holding a flashlight steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "if this doesn't work." She looked up at him briefly. "It's going to work, Morrison. It has to." With 10 minutes remaining, Rodriguez carefully traced the final connections. She had identified 3 wires that appeared to control the timing circuit. According to her training, cutting the red wire should interrupt the countdown, but the complexity of the device made her uncertain. "Morrison, I need you to get everyone back another 100 meters, she said without looking up from the device. "I'm staying here," Morrison replied firmly. Rodriguez looked at him in surprise. "Sir, there's no reason for both of us to—" "Sergeant," Morrison interrupted, "you've been right about everything today. You were right about the village, right about the mission, right about leading this patrol. I'm not leaving you to handle this alone." Rodriguez felt a moment of gratitude for Morrison's support, but time was running out. With 5 minutes left on the timer, she made her decision. "On my count," she said, positioning her wire cutters. 3, 2, 1. She cut the red wire. The timer display flickered but continued counting down. 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Her first choice had been wrong. Rodriguez's hands remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She moved to the blue wire, the second most likely candidate according to her training. 2 minutes, 40 seconds, Morrison reported, his voice tight with tension. Rodriguez positioned the cutters again. This time, she closed her eyes briefly and thought about all the soldiers depending on her, all the villagers who had trusted her enough to evacuate their homes. She cut the blue wire. The timer display went dark immediately. The truck bomb was dead. Rodriguez and Morrison stared at the silent device for several seconds before either of them moved. Finally, Rodriguez sat back heavily, her injured leg no longer able to support her weight. "Morrison," she said with a shaky smile, "I think we just saved a lot of lives." Morrison was grinning broadly as he helped her to her feet. "Sergeant, that was the most impressive thing I've ever seen. I owe you an apology for this afternoon." Rodriguez waved off his apology. "You don't owe me anything, sir. We're all on the same team." Over the radio, they could hear Chief Torres coordinating the all-clear signal and the return of villagers to their homes. The EOD team arrived 40 minutes later to safely remove the explosive materials, confirming that Rodriguez had successfully prevented a massive catastrophe. As the patrol prepared to return to base in the early morning light, Abdul Rahman approached Rodriguez one final time. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he said formally, "you have saved many lives tonight. My village will remember your courage." Rodriguez shook his hand respectfully. "Thank you, Abdul Rahman. Your help made all the difference." The old man smiled and pressed a small object into her palm. "A gift for a brave soldier," he said simply. Rodriguez looked down to see a small carved wooden medallion bearing traditional Afghan symbols of protection and honor. She was genuinely moved by the gesture. The patrol's return to base was quiet and exhausted, but filled with the satisfaction of a mission successfully completed. As they approached the main gate, Rodriguez could see that word of their success had already reached the compound. Major Campbell was waiting for them with a smile. "Outstanding work, everyone. The intelligence you gathered and the threat you neutralized will save lives throughout this region." As the soldiers dispersed to clean their equipment and rest, Morrison approached Rodriguez one final time. "Sergeant," he began, his voice humble, "I want to thank you for everything you did tonight. You proved that leadership isn't about rank or gender or which unit you come from. It's about competence, courage, and caring about the people under your command." Rodriguez looked at him thoughtfully. "Morrison, you showed real character tonight when it mattered most. That's worth more than any amount of posturing." Morrison nodded gratefully. "I learned something important today. Experience and knowledge matter more than attitude. I hope we can work together again." As Rodriguez finally made her way to the medical tent to have her injured leg properly treated, she reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. She had been mocked and dismissed by soldiers who didn't know her record or understand her capabilities. But when the situation became critical, those same soldiers had trusted her with their lives and the safety of an entire village. Corporal Kim greeted her with raised eyebrows as she limped into the medical tent. "Maria, please tell me you didn't spend the entire night walking on that injured leg." Rodriguez smiled tiredly as she settled onto the examination table. "Actually, Sarah, I spent most of it crouched next to a truck bomb trying to figure out which wire to cut." Kim stared at her in amazement as she began unwrapping the blood-soaked bandages. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. And you know what the funny thing is? This afternoon, Lieutenant Commander Morrison was telling everyone that I shouldn't be in combat because I might freeze up under pressure." Kim shook her head as she cleaned the reopened wound. "I heard about that. Word is, Morrison spent the rest of the evening telling everyone who would listen about how professional and competent you were during the mission." Rodriguez winced as Kim applied antiseptic to the injury. "People can surprise you when the chips are down. Morrison's not a bad officer. He just needed to learn some humility." "And did he learn it?" Rodriguez thought about Morrison's words and actions during the mission, particularly his decision to stay with her while she disarmed the bomb. "Yeah, I think he did." As Kim finished treating her wound, Rodriguez realized that the events of the past day had changed more than just Morrison's opinion of her capabilities. She had proven to herself once again that leadership meant taking care of your people regardless of how they treated you. The wounded female soldier who had been mocked for limping through the compound had ended up saving the lives of the very people who had questioned her place in combat. She had demonstrated that true strength wasn't about physical perfection or aggressive posturing, but about competence, courage, and the willingness to put others before yourself. Morrison and his SEAL team had learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions based on appearance rather than performance. More importantly, they had learned to recognize real leadership when they saw it. As Rodriguez finally settled into her bunk for some much-needed rest, she smiled slightly, thinking about the carved medallion from Abdul Rahman. It was a reminder that respect had to be earned through actions, not demanded through rank or attitude. The sun was rising over the Afghan mountains, marking the end of a night that had transformed a group of soldiers from strangers with preconceptions into a cohesive team that trusted each other's abilities. The wounded female soldier had proven that sometimes the most unlikely leaders are the ones who matter most when everything is on the line. Morrison never again questioned Rodriguez's place in combat operations. In fact, he specifically requested her for 3 more joint missions during the remainder of their deployment. Each time, her knowledge, leadership, and steady professionalism proved invaluable to the success of their operations. The SEAL team that had arrived with arrogance and assumptions left Afghanistan with a deeper understanding of what true military competence looked like. They had learned that experience and cultural knowledge were just as valuable as advanced training and sophisticated equipment. Rodriguez continued to serve with distinction, eventually being promoted to Sergeant First Class and receiving the Bronze Star with V device for her actions during the truck bomb incident. She never forgot the lesson that leadership meant taking care of your people, especially when they didn't necessarily deserve it. Years later, when Morrison had been promoted to lieutenant commander and was training new SEAL teams, he would tell them the story of a wounded female Army sergeant who taught him more about leadership in one night than he had learned in 7 years of military service. The story became a reminder that assumptions about capability based on appearance, gender, or service branch could be not only wrong, but dangerous. In combat, competence and character matter far more than prejudices and preconceptions. Rodriguez's injured leg healed completely, but the lessons learned during that patrol in Calayanao remained with everyone who participated for the rest of their military careers. They had witnessed firsthand that real leadership emerges not from those who demand respect, but from those who earn it through their actions when it matters most. The wounded female soldier who strolled through the compound that afternoon had proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones standing right in front of you, waiting for someone to give them a chance to show what they can do.